Blessings to you. My name is Nigel Daring. I am the originator of the philosophy of Darinism or Darinism. Um, and it's based upon my analysis of Genesis chapters 1 and 2, which I correlate to an analysis of existence. And you can check out my book, Existence, God, Man, Society, and Nature, which you're seeing in the background on that poster. You can check that out. It's on Amazon.com. Just type in my name, Nigel Daring, and you'll see 16 books crop up along with that particular book, inclusive of that particular book. Or you can just type in the name of the book, Existence, God, Man, Society, and Nature, and you can get it from there. All right, but I've done 9 previous videos on this philosophy, and I'm continuing. This is the 10th one. I'm continuing with it today. I'm taking on the obsession of flesh. All right, but first we'll do some review. Now, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which I had declared before, was Adam's physical form. Adam and Eve's physical form. They existed in a spiritual state, and I pointed out before that they're touching the tree, that the tree itself never made them evil. That they were actually evil before, or the tree never made them insecure. Because when you read the Bible, you see that they touched the tree and they knew they were naked. What happened was that they had their insecurity from before, because they exist also as spiritual state. Man isn't just physical, he's also spiritual. So they became psychologically, spiritually insecure upon acceptance of the idea that the devil offered them. The devil told them that they could be God themselves. They believed it. And by believing it, they became insecure in who they were. They weren't accepting themselves as they were. No, what they should have really said to the devil was, get away from me, I'm already God. But what the devil was encouraging was some sort of independence from the root of themselves, the God that created them. And so they became insecure in the selves that God made them, God made them in his image, and they became insecure in that being that they were, right? Trying to become something else, another concept of self. And so when they touched the tree of knowledge of good and evil, all it did was manifest their insecurity, right? And it speaks generally to to mankind, that our psychology is manifested by our is manifested in our physical form, right? However we are spiritually, our body reflects it. And so what when Adam was reaching for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Eve was reaching for their physical form to use it to achieve something great. It actually became it actually mirrored their insecurity. It reflected it. So they want to use, they're citing it as a tool, but it's also, but in reality it's a mirror. It's a shadow, right? And it points to something, their sense of desperation about wanting to escape who they were, that they were willing to believing in an illusion, an illusion. They were willing to make an illusion real in their concept of existence, just for them to chase after some false identity that they couldn't have. This is a that's their kind of self-hatred and their desire to become something else. It's a commentary on their desire to be some other thing. That they're willing to have this illusion, this physical reality, which said is an illusion. They're willing to make it real so that they can become, in a sense, real. So that in their concept they can manifest this desire to be God. So anyway, just back to the point is that their insecurity, they were insecure before they touched the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and all it did was manifest um, their insecurity. All right. Now, the devil's idea that was introduced, it was introduced as a seed. So at the outset of mankind's creation, it's just there, right? Man accepting the physical existence is real at some primal level. It's that idea is there that that they, that the physical realm is real, and that they, you know, they're that they don't like who they are naturally. That idea, and that they should be seeking some other kind of self. That idea was introduced in some primal form. Okay, and now later on during the course of human history, that idea was capitalized on, and it worked intensely, right? That they should be chasing something else while, for the duration of their period upon earth. Man should be chasing in this, making use of this um, reality, which is an illusion, to become something else. Use this for an ambition, to become something else, and so capitalizing and really utilizing this idea is the root of civilization, civilized existence. Okay. Um, Now, the other thing to notice that was that from in terms of review, we said that the idea that that this devil introduced to them, why it appealed to them, was that it was something deep in their consciousness. It was buried in their consciousness that they themselves never realized it. God knew. So Adam and Eve, they existed in a spiritual state before God even created the physical realm. And he looked upon them and realized that deep in their consciousness, they didn't really want to obey him. They didn't really want to be a part of him. They didn't want to be a part of the kingdom, the paradise they were in. They were willing to go outside of it, chase to chase an ego, but they didn't have the right conditions. So what God did was he knew what conditions could manifest that evil that's inside of them. And so he created this physical realm that's going to create the conditions by which they were going to do it. And also he created the devil as this teaser, the tempter, to come and to let them realize that they could manifest this thing that's inside of them, this idea that they could distance themselves from God and become their own God. So this thing was buried deep in their consciousness before they even manifested upon the earth. Okay, it's an evil that's inside of them. Now, I also brought up the point that we shouldn't look at our existence as being some condemnation to a life of evil, and that because we were created, we were made to manifest some deep evil that we had inside of us, and therefore we're nothing but condemned to live it out. The other perspective on this is that this is an opportunity to cleanse and purge ourselves of a deep seated evil that's within our consciousness, and to return back to God even purer than we were. Now, some of us, even most of us, fail in that task because we allow ourselves to be caught up into this existence, right? And end up, after this physical flesh is gone, we're back, we realize who we are in spirit. We just realize we're just evil in spirit, and we're outside of God's kingdom, and then we have to live that way for all eternity. Okay? But it doesn't have to be that way. What we can do is go inside ourselves and look at the evil that's inside of us, that we allow to manifest by living in time and space, by living in the conditions of life, and by having things stimulate us to evil. What we have to do is look inside of us at the evil inside of us and try to purge it from inside of us and return to God even better than we came here, and be prepared to live in his kingdom with him for all eternity, feeding off his body, his life, living in paradise. Okay, we're naturally made for paradise. We came out of paradise. We were made from paradise. That should be our home. This is just a trip through time and space. Now, I also made a point about being born evil and being made evil. Now, some people, they say, "Oh, you know what? I had certain desires in me, and they're evil desires, but they always had it since birth. So what are they going to do? This is who they were since birth." Um, right? No, it's true that they sense these desires since they were born, and they knew it inside of them, right? And so they felt compelled to act it out. But they were born evil, but they weren't made evil. Okay? It's the condition of physical existence that brought out a certain evil in them, right? But that was already in their consciousness prior to coming up on earth. But in all reality, God never made man evil. He never made anybody evil. So even though you might have known yourself to have a certain evil or a certain compulsion towards a certain evil since birth, it doesn't mean that's the way you were made. You can get rid of that evil that's inside of you. All right. So just remember, when God created everything, He said it's all good. That means when He created us, we were good. The evil came in because we drifted through the consciousness that He gave us and the willpower He gave us. We drifted from the good. Now, last thing I did was I had distinguished between consciousness, self-consciousness, and subconsciousness. Consciousness is, of course, our it defines our ego. Our all right, we can't divorce consciousness from our ego. Other animals don't have an ego, right? Other beings in physical realm don't have an ego because they don't have a consciousness. The conscious state of being is one defined by ego, this conceptual sense of self. Okay, and it's an alive sense of self. It's a sense of self that needs a certain level of importance, and it's a conceptual sense of importance. Now, in our consciousness is defined by ego. It's defined by the ability to receive ideas, to process ideas, to generate ideas. Okay, so that's our consciousness. When we speak of subconsciousness, we're talking about our being that can't be seen. That's within our physical, um, within our body, that drives our body. That's the source of that. It's our spirit. It's a non-physical entity. Remember, I said God is the nothingness. He lives in the nothingness. He is the nothingness. He's the nothingness. We also have a representation in the nothingness, and we're a spirit. We have spiritual beings, and that spiritual being constitutes our subconscious self. That's within us. That drives us. That that our body reflects. Um, then I spoke about self-consciousness, which is the product of our insecurity. Self-consciousness means you're checking out yourself. Because we're insecure, we're uncomfortable with ourselves, based upon the state of where our consciousness is. We become self-conscious, where we're checking ourselves out, and that has consequence. So in a self-conscious state, you're in a state of perennially checking out yourself and examining and re-examining, and you're never comfortable in yourself. All right. So that's our review up to this point. Now let's take on the obsession with flesh. So the devil presents this idea that man can get this alternate ego, the ego that he has, that God created him as, um, was one where God created man in His image. Man is a reflection of God, and man is supposed to reflect God's will. That right. So that's man's natural position. He should be just reflecting God's will, right, in the periphery. God is the center, the creative, the organizing center, the truth, the the main processing center of existence. He's the one that controls, that rules, that understands it all, and that knows, and he's supposed to now relay his ideas to us, and we're supposed to receive them and act upon them in reflection of what he wants. And that's the natural order of existence. What the devil then gives to Adam is this idea that he doesn't have to accept that position. He can become a center in himself. Feed off this tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is a center, and make yourself a center. Feed off it for life. Find life in flesh. Don't. So that's what when the devil said to him, God lied to you, basically. You're not gonna die. You can feed off this thing for life, and what the devil is telling him, feed off it for feed your ego. Let this ego now become your new life, your new focus. Now, in focusing on flesh, the devil accepts Adam's idea, and now he's going to use this flesh, this physical form. Now, in focusing it on it, the flesh, to use it to achieve something else, this great ego, the flesh itself becomes a focus. He's now in flesh. He's focused upon flesh. Right? And that becomes a comment on self-consciousness now. He's right? He's using this thing for this ego trip, but he can't help by virtue of his using it, he can't help but become ingrained in it, become buried in it, and become focused upon it because he's trying to use it for something else. But then flesh itself becomes an obsession, and so for one, is self-consciousness, right, that he has in spirit becomes manifested in flesh, and so he ends up being self-conscious in flesh, trying to use it to achieve this great thing. So now the self-consciousness in spirit ends up translating to flesh, where he's studying his body. So what's going on in spirit is occurring in flesh, right? So by his using, so it's so in from two perspectives, right? The body is reflecting Adam's insecurity in spirit and his self-consciousness in spirit, and the other thing, and so he can't, right? So by virtue of his being insecure in spirit, he's going to be insecure in his body and self-conscious in his body, checking it out. And then the other perspective is by his very use of the body, by his focus on using the body and checking the body out, that becomes a state of self-consciousness in itself. Just his spiritual being is focused on the body, then he becomes that becomes an act of self-consciousness in itself. This act of focusing on the self and checking it out. Now, in focusing on the body, inevitably he's studying it, right? And that's the root of where we get this thing from, of studying the body, of being obsessed with checking it out and understanding it. All right, and in studying it, you end up learning about its utility, right? What it can do, what it can't do, and right, and also its inadequacy. Because once you start checking out self, once you're right, you always are gonna find fault. You're not taking it for granted that it's there, it's good, it's perfect as God made it. You're gonna find its inadequacy. You're gonna find fault with it, right? Now that's in reflection of what's going on in spirit, and it's also speaks to the attitude of checking out flesh, that because you're checking out flesh for greatness, that is brought into the realm of the physical realm of checking out the body. That manifests in the act of checking out the body, constantly checking out the body, because you're checking it out, you're going to notice it, right? And because you're insecure, you're always going to find fault with it. Because you're checking it out, you're always going to find fault with it. You get into checking something out constantly, you're going to find fault with it. So what happens when you discover the body, you want to make use of it, right? You're going to study it, you want to make use of it, right? So it's not just that you're using it for this ego, but you become because it is the tool. It is what it is your reality. It is what you're using to construe reality and to define reality. You become obsessed with it, and you discover it. You want to make use of it, right? You're going to use it, and also because you you have this insecurity that comes into play spiritually, and by the very act of you, the self-conscious act of you checking it out, to use it, you're going to find fault with it, and once you find fault, that means you also want to change it, because you're going to be changing it of some idea of perfection that it could be. Because remember, the psychology you're approaching the body with is you're not perfect. The devil gave you this idea that you are not perfect, that you need to be something else, right? And so you're going to be using the you're going to be bringing this idea to the body that you're not perfect and you need to be something else. And so that's why the body itself, you're going to look at it and think it's not perfect. It needs to be changed. And so that's why you see people nowadays with the psychology from the very beginning that was transmitted through the ages, constantly changing themselves, putting on stuff on themselves, doing their hair or doing their bodies or doing, putting on things to think that their body needs to be accentuated. It is not naturally beautiful because man never accepted himself from the beginning once he accepted the devil's idea that he is imperfect and he could be something else, and that he brought that psychology to his own body in checking out his body, that it is imperfect because the body is a part of his identity. And if he's thinking, if he has this mentality that he's imperfect, then he's thinking of his body as imperfect also, and it needs to be changed. And once you start focusing on the body for change it, for thinking about it, you're gonna think there's something wrong with it. You need to change it. Um, Now, as I said before, once you start checking out the body, also you come to realize its desires, and you become obsessed with them, right? The desires of flesh. Once you start because flesh becomes your sense of identity, and your reality, right? You're gonna notice your physical desires. You're gonna be obsessed with them. You're gonna be focused on them, right? So the pleasures of flesh, that becomes centrally important to your existence and your reality, right? Right. So you become obsessed with what how you feel, the body's feelings. That's part of the obsession of with flesh. Now there's also what comes with the obsession with flesh and the self-consciousness is clothing. Because there's a lust of flesh that occurred in spirit. When the devil introduced this idea that the body could be used, he's encouraging a lust of flesh for food, lust after it for food. God originally told man to lust after his own body for life. God said, feed off me for life. My spirit, my being, the tree of life is the body of God. Is the essence of who he is what I call his I am existence, right? And he's saying to man, basically, feed off my body, live in spirit, feed off my body in spirit. The devil brought Adam and Eve to a lust after flesh, to feed off their own flesh for life and find life in flesh, find life in the material realm, right? Because once they're in flesh, right, it's a material realm that they're gathering, right? Because its flesh is perceiving a material realm. It is the brain is gathering stimuli from the material realm and making sense of it to determine its surroundings and its reality, right? So there's a lust of flesh that goes with this idea of living in flesh for existence and for identity. And what happens with the lust of flesh, if it becomes obsessed with it, right? The sexual, because the lust of flesh in spirit, man lusting after his own flesh becomes a reference for his behavior in terms of dealing with other human beings and dealing with the world, right? That lust of flesh can become an obsession to the point that it prevents the ego trip, right? Because flesh is supposed improper, even though there's an obsession with it, it's supposed to be only a tool to get to this great sense of ego. But if you stop at flesh proper and you're so wrapped up in the lust of it, and and you're caught up in the desires of it, right? You're not gonna be able to get to this great ego that you're chasing after. You're not gonna be able to be on this quest for this ego if you're wrapped up in flesh to that point where the lust, you're encapsulated by the lust. So what happens is there's this necessity for clothing to sort of demand respect, because if you're living in a state of lust, you're aware that others around you could be living in that state or living in that state. Your mind is impure now. You realize that there's such a thing as lust of flesh and others could be lusting. So you're putting on clothes is a demand for respect, and also it's a demand for reducing. It's you're trying to reduce the lust. So by their putting on clothes, you're trying to reduce your own lust after them, right? Not seeing their organs or sexual organs, so that you become obsessed with that, and your mind becomes obsessed with that. The idea is flesh is supposed only to be used. Really, the original idea is flesh is to be used for this great chase after this great ego. So if you're caught up in the lust, you're not going to be able to chase it. So you need clothing. The other thing why you need clothing is because of the shame, insecurity. Because when they first touched the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? Adam and Eve first touched it, they became insecure and knew they were naked, right? Right? Because, well, they didn't become insecure. The flesh manifested their insecurity, and they knew they were naked. So now they had to put on clothes, right? So there's this thing with flesh where they're ashamed of it, right? And because they're ashamed of it, right? Their insecurity brought the flesh, and they're checking out of flesh, their obsession with the flesh. They're going to find fault with it. It is inadequate. They're not they're not whole. They're not perfect. They need clothes. So the clothes is the necessity of clothing is to help prevent lust, help reduce it, and also to cover to address their shame. Now, just to point out, this relationship that man developed with himself is insecurity, is lust, is obsession with flesh. Um, the idea that things aren't perfect, things need to be changed. This inadequacy in himself translates to inadequacy in the world that he's in. So what happens is his relationship with himself in spirit is a relationship with his body, sets a standard by which he's going to address the world outside of him, by which he's going to address his reality. Okay? Because that's going to be important when we consider civilization. Okay, that's all we'll do for today. I'm sorry for the abrupt ending from the last slide, but it's not my fault. The computer does, as I said previously in some other presentations, that the computer does skip and just cuts my line of thought and my train of thought. But anyway, I was pretty much done anyway with the last slide, and so I just added this slide here just to close out. And thank you for watching. Until next time, I'll see you.